My husband made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a word, not a gasp, just the quietest exhale, the kind a person makes when something they suspected turns out to be true. We were standing at the edge of my parents' living room, holding paper plates, watching my sister tell a story about a village in Malawi, and Ryan set his cup of sweet tea down on the bookshelf beside him very slowly, the way he does at work when something in a file doesn't add up. I touched his arm. He leaned close to my ear and said, "Something's off." The room was full of people. My mother had strung paper lanterns along the porch ceiling and draped a banner over the mantel that read, "Welcome home," Lauren in her careful, looping handwriting. Neighbors had brought casserole dishes. The pastor from First Methodist had come by with his wife. My grandmother sat in the good armchair by the window, holding a glass of lemonade, watching my sister the way old women watch things they want to memorize. Lauren stood in the center of it all, looking exactly the way she always had, confident, composed, a little sunburned. She was 36 and had spent the last 2 years doing volunteer medical work at a clinic in sub-Saharan Africa, or so we had been told. So she had told us. She wore a simple blue dress, no jewelry, and her hair was shorter than I remembered. She had lost some weight. Everyone said she looked like someone who had lived something real. My father stood near the door with his arms crossed and his chest out. He had that expression he only wore a few times a year. Pride so complete it almost looked like pain. I turned to Ryan. "What do you mean off?" He glanced at my sister. "I'll tell you later." That was the thing about being married to someone who spent his days vetting people for federal security clearances. He never said anything dramatic. He never made a scene. He just noticed things quietly, the way a person notices a crack in a wall before the ceiling falls. I tried to go back to enjoying the party. I laughed at the right moments and refilled my grandmother's lemonade and told my Aunt Patricia that yes, Lauren looked wonderful, and yes, we were all so proud. I stood next to my mother while she cried happy tears into a dish towel and said she had prayed every single night for 2 years that her daughter would come home safe. Lauren hugged her and said, "I know, Mom, I'm home now." I watched my sister's face while she said it. I had always been the younger one, the less remarkable one. Lauren had gone to medical school. I had become a middle school English teacher. Lauren had done a fellowship. I had gotten married and moved 20 minutes away. Lauren had gone to Africa. I had repainted our guest room. There was no bitterness in any of that. It was simply the shape our lives had taken. But because I had always watched her closely, the way younger siblings do, I thought I knew her face better than almost anyone. Something in it, right then, was working too hard. Ryan found me in the kitchen later while I was cutting the welcome home cake my mother had ordered from the bakery downtown. He closed the door behind him. "Talk to me," I said. He leaned against the counter. She described the clinic in Malawi, the layout, the staff, the patient load, and the numbers she gave for average daily patients don't match what that region's clinics typically see. Way too high. I put the knife down. "How would you even know that?" "I spent 6 months vetting aid workers for a State Department contract 2 years ago," he said. "I read a lot of reports." He paused. "Hannah, I might be wrong." "You're usually not." He didn't answer that. "She also mentioned a colleague," he said. "A doctor away at the clinic. She described him as the lead physician. But when she said his name, she looked down. Just for a second. People look down when they're searching for something they're not sure they remember correctly. People look up when they're remembering something real." I stared at him. "You can't build a whole conclusion out of where someone looks." "I'm not building a conclusion," he said. "I'm telling you what I noticed." My mother pushed open the kitchen door with her hip, carrying an empty punch bowl, and Ryan and I separated automatically. She smiled at both of us, said the cake looked beautiful, and disappeared back into the noise. I stood very still. I did not sleep well that night. Ryan was quiet beside me, breathing steadily, and I lay in the dark thinking about all the things I knew about my sister, sorting through them the way you sort through a drawer you haven't opened in a while, surprised by what you find and what's missing. Lauren had called us from Africa regularly, or she had texted. She had sent photographs, wide landscapes, a concrete building with a red cross painted on the side, children. But I realized, lying there at 2 o'clock in the morning, that I had never once video called her. The connection was always bad, she had said. The clinic's internet was unreliable. I had accepted that without a second thought, because of course I had. She was my sister. She was a doctor. She had always been the reliable one. I turned over. "Ryan, I'm awake. He said, "What exactly would it look like if she wasn't there?" He was quiet for a moment, then answered his own question. It would look like photographs taken somewhere else, stories assembled from things you can read online, calls at times that could be explained away. But why would she? I stopped. He waited. She had a hard time before she left, I said slowly. The year before, she was quiet in a way that wasn't like her. I thought it was just exhaustion. Residency, then the fellowship, then everything she was trying to do. What kind of hard time? I don't know exactly. She didn't talk about it. She never really talked about hard things. That was always more my department. He was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want to find out?" I stared at the ceiling fan. "No," I said honestly. But yes, the next morning while Lauren slept in my old bedroom at my parents' house, Ryan opened his laptop at my kitchen table and started carefully. He was better at this than anyone I knew. Not because he was suspicious by nature. He wasn't, actually, but because he had spent years learning the difference between a life that had been lived and a life that had been arranged. We started with what we could access. Her medical license publicly listed. Her hospital employment history partially visible through professional directories. Her clinic's name and location, which she had mentioned enough times that I had written it down once in a text thread with my mother. For the first 20 minutes, things looked ordinary. Lauren had graduated medical school. Her license was active. She had completed a fellowship at a teaching hospital in Atlanta. That all matched what we knew. Then Ryan leaned forward. "Her license," he said. "What about it?" "It's active now, but there's a gap." He pointed at the screen. Medical licenses in Georgia go through the Composite Medical Board Public Records. If there's a disciplinary action or a suspension, it shows. I looked at the screen. "There's a suspension listed," he said. "A temporary suspension. 2.5 years ago. Reinstated 14 months later." He looked at me. That timeline overlaps with when she said she left for Africa. The room felt like it tilted slightly. "What does a suspension mean?" Ryan sat back. "Could be a lot of things. Paperwork violations, billing issues, or it could be something more serious." He looked at me steadily. "I can't know which without more." I crossed my arms. I was cold even though the heat was running. If her license was suspended, she couldn't have been practicing at a clinic. "No," he said. She could not have. We sat with that for a while. Outside, a truck rumbled down the street. Normal sounds, unhelpful sounds. "She might have a good explanation," I said. "She might," Ryan agreed. He never argued with the charitable interpretation. He just waited for the facts to settle. By mid-afternoon, I did something that felt like a betrayal and also like the only honest thing left to do. I called a woman named Dr. Cheryl Watkins, whose name had appeared in the same hospital directory as Lauren's, listed as a department supervisor. I had no real reason to call her except that she existed in the same professional world my sister had lived in, and I was running out of threads. She answered on the third ring. "Watkins, professional," clipped. I introduced myself, said I was Lauren's sister, said I was trying to piece together a timeline for a family matter. Nothing serious, just getting dates straight. I hated how practiced I sounded. Ryan had not coached me, but 2 years of watching him work had apparently taught me something. There was a pause on Dr. Watkins's end. "Lauren," she said carefully. Not warmly, not coldly, carefully. "Yes," I said. "She just got back from abroad. We're celebrating." Another pause, longer. "I see. Did you work with her closely for a time?" A breath. "I'm not sure what I can appropriately share." "I understand. She had a hard period a few years ago and she doesn't really talk about it. I love her. I just want to understand." The line was quiet long enough that I thought she might hang up. Then she said, in a voice that had softened slightly, "Your sister is talented. She was one of the best residents we had, past tense, but she went through something very difficult. I think she deserved more support than she received." My throat tightened. "What kind of difficult?" Dr. Watkins hesitated. "I can tell you that burnout in medicine is a crisis that doesn't get talked about enough, and that the way it sometimes presents, the way people cope with it, can have consequences that follow a person in ways that aren't fair." She wasn't going to say it directly. She didn't have to. "Prescription medication?" I asked quietly. A long pause. "I'm not in a position to confirm specifics," she said. but I hope your sister is well. I genuinely mean that." And then she said goodbye, and the call ended. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my lap and didn't move for several minutes. Ryan came in from the other room. He had heard enough from the doorway. He didn't ask me to repeat it. He sat down across from me and waited. "She wasn't in Africa," I said. He nodded once. "She was suspended because she had a problem with prescription medication. And I stopped. My voice was doing something I didn't want it to do. She told our parents she was going to Africa. She let us all believe she was out there saving lives for 2 years. I pressed my hand over my mouth for a moment. "Where was she, Ryan? Where was she actually?" He was quiet. "I don't know yet. And maybe that part belongs to her to tell." I looked at him. "We know enough to talk to her." He said, "We don't need to know every detail before we do." That was the most important thing he said all day. I drove to my parents' house alone the next morning. Ryan offered to come. I shook my head, the same way the narrator in every story like this always does, because some conversations belong only to the people inside them. The drive took 12 minutes. I could have walked it. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of southern November morning where the light comes in gold and flat and the air smells faintly of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. Ordinary morning, unaware of what it was carrying. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was reading the paper. Lauren was on the back porch with a mug of coffee, wrapped in an old cardigan I recognized from high school. I poured myself coffee and went outside. She looked up when she heard the door. She smiled, but I saw her read my face, and the smile shifted into something quieter. "Beautiful morning," she said. "It is." I sat down in the other chair. We looked at the yard together for a moment. My mother's garden was dormant, brown and careful, waiting for spring. "Ryan," Lauren said finally. "Not a question. He notices things," I said. "He's careful that way." She nodded and looked down at her coffee. A leaf fell from the oak tree at the back of the yard and landed on the brick patio without a sound. "How much do you know?" she asked. "Enough," I said. "I think I need you to tell me the rest." She was quiet for a long time. A cardinal landed on the fence post, bright as a warning, then flew away. Finally, she said, "I didn't know how to come home. That broke me open a little. Not enough to stop, but enough to feel it." "Start at the beginning," I said. Lauren set her mug on the porch railing. She told me in the flat, precise way of someone who has rehearsed a confession so many times in their head that all the emotion has been worn smooth. The last year of her fellowship, she said, she had started taking things to get through the shifts. Not dramatically. That was the part nobody understood. It was never dramatic at the beginning. It was practical. It was one more hour, one more double shift, one more patient who needed something. She felt like she had nothing left to give. The medication helped, and then it became something she needed in a way that scared her. A colleague noticed. There was a report. Her license was suspended pending evaluation and a monitored treatment program. She entered a rehabilitation program in Asheville. She was there for 3 months. Then she lived in a small apartment in Chattanooga for nearly a year, working a part-time administrative job at a medical office, going to meetings, rebuilding something inside herself that had broken down in ways she hadn't understood until she stopped moving long enough to feel it. "And Africa?" I said. She looked at her hands. "I told Mom and Dad I'd taken a position with a humanitarian organization before any of it happened. I was so excited. Then everything fell apart and I couldn't." She stopped. "Dad had already told every person he knew. He was so proud." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I couldn't tell them I wasn't going, so I just didn't." I said I was going. I let them think I went. The photos, taken from colleagues who actually did go. I asked them once to send me pictures for a presentation I said I was putting together. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I deleted the texts afterward. I'm not proud of that. The calls? I stayed on Eastern Time. It wasn't hard to manage. I said the connection was bad, so we never had to video call. She looked up at me. I hated it. I hated every single call. I hated hearing Mom's voice while she was telling her friends at church that her daughter was helping children in Africa. I set my coffee mug down. "How long were you going to keep this going?" She shook her head. "I didn't plan any of this, Hannah. I want you to understand that. I didn't sit down one day and decide to construct a lie. I made one decision and then another decision to cover it. And then I was inside something I didn't know how to get out of." She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Raw, stripped of everything polished. I'm better now. I genuinely am. My license was reinstated. I'm in a monitoring program. I've been clean for 14 months. I came home because I finally felt like I was the person I used to be again. She paused. But I also came home because I was so tired. I was so tired of the lie. I didn't answer for a moment. I was doing the thing you do when someone's honesty rearranges what you thought you understood. Taking stock, adjusting. Then I said, "You have to tell them." She flinched visibly. "It will devastate Mom. It will devastate her more if she finds out another way. And Dad. Dad is stronger than you think," I said. I surprised myself with how certain I sounded. "Lauren, you have to tell them today." She looked at the yard, the bare branches, the flat winter light, the bird feeder my mother had hung from the clothesline post 15 years earlier and never taken down. "Will you be there?" she asked. "Yes," she nodded once. Then she picked up her coffee and went inside. What came next is difficult to describe, the way most true things are difficult to describe. It did not look the way you would expect. There was no screaming, no dramatic accusation. My mother cried, but not angrily. My father went very still, the way he always does when he is processing something large, sitting straight in his kitchen chair with his hands folded on the table and his eyes on his daughter's face. Lauren told them plainly. She did not over-explain. She did not over-apologize. She told them what had happened, what the suspension meant, where she had actually been, what she had done to get better. She told them about Asheville, about Chattanooga, about the meetings and the monitoring and the 14 months. When she finished, the kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. My mother was the first to speak. "All this time you were alone with that." Lauren's face crumpled. "I didn't want you to be disappointed in me." My mother stood up from her chair and crossed the kitchen and wrapped both arms around my sister the way she had when we were children. My sister, 36 years old and taller than my mother by 4 inches, bent into her like she was small again, disappointed. My mother said, almost to herself, "I'm heartbroken that you suffered alone." My father watched. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to worry. Then he cleared his throat and looked at Lauren. "The work you did on yourself," he said carefully. "The 14 months that took strength." Lauren looked at him. "Dad, I mean it," he said. "That took more strength than most people have." He paused. "I'm not angry about the mistake. I'm not even angry about Africa." Another pause. "I'm angry that you thought we couldn't handle the truth." Lauren's eyes filled. "We've been through things," he said. "Your mother and I long before you were born. We know what hard looks like." He looked down at the table for a moment, then back up. "You are our daughter. That is not a conditional thing." My grandmother had been sitting quietly in the corner, and I had almost forgotten she was there. She was 82 and had outlived one husband and 2 of her closest friends, and a way of life that no longer existed. She said nothing for a while. Then she looked at Lauren with steady, dark eyes and said, "The truth is always smaller than the secret." Nobody had a response to that. It did not need one. The weeks after were quieter than I expected. I had braced for a long fallout, the kind of sustained, difficult period that families sometimes enter after a revelation, full of careful conversations and managed silences. Instead, something simpler happened. Lauren stayed. She got a part-time consulting position at a medical education nonprofit that worked within her monitoring terms. She showed up at my parents' house for Sunday dinners and helped my mother with the holiday shopping and sat next to my father during football games. And she did not perform any of it. She was just there, plainly, without the weight of a story she had to maintain. I noticed it in small ways. The way she laughed more easily. The way she answered questions directly instead of redirecting. The way she could sit in a room full of family and not appear to be managing an invisible emergency at the same time. One evening in early December, she came by our house with a bottle of wine, and we sat at the kitchen table while Ryan made pasta. And at some point she looked at me and said, "I want to apologize to you specifically." I looked up. "You were always the one who actually knew me," she said. "And I let you believe something that wasn't true for 2 years. That feels different than the other parts." I did not know what to say to that at first. Then I said, "I think I knew something was off. I just didn't know what. And I chose not to look." She nodded slowly. "We do that with people we love." "Yeah," I said, "we do." Ryan set a bowl of pasta on the table and sat down, and we ate, the three of us, in the comfortable way of people who had been through something true together and come out the other side, still sitting in the same room. At Christmas, my grandmother pulled me aside while everyone was doing the dishes and said quietly, "She looks lighter." "I thought so too," I said. My grandmother nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had seen enough of life to know that lighter was not guaranteed, but it was worth noting when it arrived. My father gave a toast at Christmas dinner. Short. He was not a long speech man. He raised his glass and looked around the table and said, "To the real version of things." He caught Lauren's eye when he said it and smiled. Not a big smile, just a steady one. She smiled back. I thought she might cry. She did not. We drank. Later, when everyone had gone and Ryan and I were driving home through the dark December streets with the Christmas lights still blinking in the windows of houses we passed, I said to him, "Thank you." He looked over from the driver's seat. "For noticing," I said, "and for being careful about it." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to be right," he said. "I know. But I thought if I wasn't careful and it turned out to be something real, you'd all keep living inside it." I watched the lights go by outside the window. Red, green, white, ordinary and bright. The thing about truth that nobody tells you is that it does not actually destroy the people who love each other. Not usually. What it destroys is the exhausting work of maintaining a false version of them. My sister had spent 2 years holding up a story, feeding it details, managing the distance it required. And somewhere in that time, she had gone from a person to a caretaker of a fiction. When the fiction ended, the person came back. We were not the same family we had been before that welcome home party. We were something more precise, something with sharper edges and fewer assumptions. My mother still cried sometimes when she thought about my sister alone in Chattanooga in the winter. My father still went quiet sometimes in a particular way I recognized as grief, but neither of them wanted the lie back. They wanted their daughter, the actual one, and they had her. That, I think, is the thing worth holding on to. Not that the truth was easy. It was not. Not that everything healed cleanly. It did not. But that the people who loved each other most were, in the end, capable of loving the real version of each other. Better than capable. They chose it. And if something in this story found you, if you have carried something heavy, or watched someone you love disappear behind a version of themselves that was not quite real, then hold on to this. The truth, when it finally comes, usually takes up less space than the secret, sometimes much less. If this stayed with you, pass it on to someone who may need to hear it.